Hello and welcome to From Then and Now. I am your host, Johnson McMichaels, and I'm joined today by our guests, Benjamin Montgomery and Damon John. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Well, Mr. McMichaels, it's an honor to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. Well, Mr. McMichaels, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor to be able to sit down with you, as well as one of my role models here in Mr. Montgomery. I've gained a lot of inspiration from him, so to be able to talk to him once again is always an honor. Thank you so much. Before we begin, From Then and Now is a podcast about individuals and how their lives are affected in different historical contexts. Today's episode is titled From Drivers to Dreamers, and it focuses on the history of Black entrepreneurship in America and how it has changed from slavery into modern day. Well, let's jump right in. Gentlemen, you both have a very unique set of circumstances. Mr. Montgomery, you were a slave to the Davis plantation. Mr. John, you were born in New York City in the late 60s, grew up in the 70s. My first question for you both is, what were your motives for starting your business? Damon, if you don't mind, I'd love to respond to this one first. Thank you so much for the question, Mr. McMichaels. As you know, I grew up as a slave boy, and as a slave, I had very limited opportunities and options in what I could do. I was fortunate enough, however, to learn how to read. I was taught how to read, and that honestly provided the basis for a lot of what I decided to do. I saw that I had an opportunity that most slaves didn't. I knew that I had to capitalize on it somehow, because what do I look like throwing away this opportunity that I have when all of my brothers and sisters who worked with me on that plantation did not have the ability to read or write, and I did. I had to do something with that. So that's when I decided to take on some managerial responsibility on the plantation, which evolved into me having my own business ventures, and that were separate, still related to, but separate from the officially separate from the plantation. And honestly, I decided to start my entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial activity because I knew my family needed some leverage so that we wouldn't be treated so poorly. I saw and I experienced such abuse from my masters, and I knew that I didn't want that for my kids and my family, so I had to get something better. That's not an easy question. For me, I think to understand my motives, you first have to understand the situation that I grew up in. I grew up poor in Queens, New York, so that naturally creates some sort of drive in you. At least it did for me, to get out of my situation and find something better for myself and for my family. When I was a kid, I always knew I needed to do something. I was always trying to start business ventures or just, find little ways to earn a little bit of extra money. So that was the biggest motive, I'd say, was just the situation that I grew up in, and seeing my parents struggle, seeing my family and my friends struggle. But I think ultimately just having the idea for FUBU as something new and unique, something for Black people by Black people, I knew it was a really cool and novel idea, so I had to execute on it. Wow, it's fascinating. You both had very different answers, but I can't help but see the parallel between them. Mr. Montgomery, you said you were tired of being taken advantage of, but that is no doubt very similar to the situation of Mr. John. You both came from circumstances where you found yourself struggling. Of course, not to discount Mr. Montgomery, yours was particularly unique and particularly harmful, but you both wanted to just do better for yourselves and your families. I find it very interesting that there's still such a connection between the motives for economic activity for slaves, for young black slaves, and for young black men today. To move on, my next question: what were the biggest barriers in starting your business? I'd say, the biggest barrier for me in starting my business, of course, being a slave added so much difficulty, but beyond what you would expect, my clients, I wasn't able to trust them less. The people that I did business with, because I was in a place where I was seen as a second-class citizen. The words of the people, my white clients, would be taken over me, so they could, no matter what, they could steal from me. They could do whatever they wanted, and I couldn't say anything, and have any legal chance of fighting it. However, I did have my position, and being a part of the Davis plantation and being such a valuable part of the Davis plantation, that provided some leverage and some authority. But ultimately, I'd have to say that was one of the biggest barriers, was just not being able to trust those I was doing business with. Of course, I faced a lot of barriers when I was younger. Just being a young black man and not being taken seriously was always an issue, was always a struggle. Even in the industry where I was facing and talking to a lot of black people, a lot of black people who were very successful, it was still a struggle just because of how black people are viewed in our society and our culture. And of course, you can't. When I was at the levels that I had to work with white people. There were so many white people that I was working with, and they didn't understand me. They didn't understand where I came from. And so they had a lot of prejudice about me as a person. Wow, Mr. John, I don't mean to interject, but I had some of the very same issues when I was struggling to start my multi-million-dollar media business. I'd have to say the biggest difficulty, the biggest barrier in my business, I'd have to say, was just dealing with changes in the market, dealing with, things like that. Just gradually over time, how to overcome challenges and still turn a profit and still be a successful organization, be a successful leader. I'd say it was a struggle for me, especially in coming out of the 20th century, coming out of the 20th century into the early 2000s was a struggle for my business, just because everything was changing. What people wanted was changing. The way people marketed was changing. And so all these moving factors, all these different components created some real issues, some real struggles for FUBU, and just navigating that and still coming out of it the other side and being a profitable company was one of my major barriers. Wow. It is almost disheartening to see that as Black Americans, we still face such a disadvantage, if you will, such a unique set of issues that others in our position don't have to face, especially when starting a business. It's frustrating to see, at the least. Now, unfortunately, we have to move to closing. So I'll ask my final question. When do you feel like you reached success? When was that moment when you decided, I'm here, I've made it? And have you reached it yet? Wow, that's a really difficult question to answer, because, as a slave, how do you even really define success? I mean, whatever you do is not really even yours. So do you really have any personal success? It's really a difficult question to answer. Many would say like a success as a slave would be once you purchase your freedom. And I guess I never did that. So in that way, maybe I was never successful. But I would say once I realized that when I felt like I had success was when I realized that I had enough leverage as a valuable part of the plantation, a valuable member enough leverage to get what I wanted from my owner, to get what I desired, to take care of my family. That's when I guess I would say I found success, was once I was elevated to a point where some people wouldn't even be able to recognize my situation as one of that of a slave. Mr. John, now to you. When do you feel like you reached success? I thought I had found success in my early 30s, my late 20s, when Fubu really took off. I thought, this is it. I've made it. But there was a lot I didn't know. I was still very young in that business. And like I talked about earlier, all the struggles I faced in the 2000s and what that looked like for Fubu helped me realize, like, success is an ongoing thing. It's not just I reached success and now I'm here. It's something you have to maintain. And so I say I was successful once Fubu was successful, and it's been maintaining that success throughout the struggling, and switching careers and just being able to maintain something for myself has shown me success, I'd say. Instead of when did I become successful, it's when have I found success. And I'd say that's when. Well, Mr. Montgomery, Mr. John, that was my last question. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and sharing your insights into your businesses. And it was great to hear from you both, and understand your stories, as well as kind of what connects you both. Thank you. Well, thank you both so much. It was great to be able to speak with both of you guys. And thank you to the listeners too. And I appreciate having this platform. I'm always love to be able to speak my mind. So thank you, Mr. McMichaels.